the Queen of Mystery, and her grand tale of secrets. If T here is one name that has echoed through the annals of detective fiction, it is Agatha Christie. Known as the Queen of Mystery, her stories have captivated generations, weaving complex webs of intrigue, suspense, and human nature's darkest corners. Christie's works have earned her the distinction of being one of the best-selling authors of all time, and T here is no better testament to her enduring power than the novels that continue to mesmerize readers decades after they were first published. Her books have taken us into the drawing rooms of the wealthy, the bustling streets of cities, and the quiet corners of rural villages, always with a promise of a mystery waiting to be unraveled. But it is in her unique ability to create seemingly unsolvable puzzles, and the way she artfully peels back layers of character and motive, that Christie truly shines. She has mastered the art of not just crafting a mystery, but inviting the reader into a world of misdirection, drama, and astonishing revelations. Each twist, each turn, pulls the reader deeper into the labyrinth of her mind. And among the treasures of Christie's collection is one that brilliantly showcases this unmatched talent, the 1925 novel, The Secret of Chimneys. In The Secret of Chimneys, Christie does what she does best. She creates an atmospheric world filled with deception, secrets, and a motley crew of fascinating characters, all of whom seem to have something to hide. But this is more than just a murder mystery. It's a tale that mingles political intrigue, romance, and hidden histories, all while maintaining her signature wit and dark humor. What's more, Christie does not simply present a whodunit, but a whydunit where the reasons behind the crime are as compelling as the crime itself. The story unfolds at Chimneys, a sprawling estate nestled somewhere in the English countryside, with the kind of grandeur that invites both admiration and suspicion. But Chimneys is not your typical country house. It is a place of secrets, whispers of things hidden beneath its beautiful historic walls. And it is here, within this imposing estate, that a mystery as old as the house itself comes to life. The first question that graces the reader's mind is deceptively simple. What secrets lie within Chimneys? Is it the former grandeur of the estate, now slowly crumbling under the weight of its own history? Or is it the people who have passed through its halls, each carrying their own enigmatic burdens? The answer to that question will slowly unfold through the pages of Christie's tale, revealing that Chimneys, like the best of her stories, is far more than it seems at first glance. The plot begins with a seemingly mundane task, a job that anyone might accept. But in Christie's world, even the most ordinary of missions often conceals the most extraordinary of consequences. Enter Anthony Cade, a charming adventurer with a past full of mystery of his own. Cade's task is simple: deliver a memoir and a set of important documents to a publisher. The simplicity of the job stands in stark contrast to what it will eventually reveal: an entire web of conspiracy, murder, and political maneuvering. As Cade embarks on this seemingly innocuous errand, he soon finds himself caught up in something far darker than he could have imagined. But as with all of Christie's best works, The Secret of Chimneys is not merely about one man's journey into the unknown. It is a reflection of the world around him, world in the midst of political tension, where a European monarchy is struggling to stay afloat, and where every individual has something to gain or lose from the shifting balance of power. The memoir and documents Cade must deliver are part of a much larger puzzle, one that stretches far beyond the confines of Chimneys and its enigmatic inhabitants. What begins as a simple delivery soon morphs into something far more dangerous. A murder rocks the estate. Prince Michaei of Czechoslovakia is found dead. And with the prince's death comes the realization that the political games of Europe have found their way to chimneys. Was it a random killing, a crime of passion, or is something far more insidious at play? The moment the prince's body is discovered, the house itself seems to take on a life of its own. With every creak of the floorboards, and every shadow cast by the flickering candles, the mansion whispers of long-buried secrets, of family legacies lost to time, and of power struggles that will stop at nothing to succeed. The guests at Chimneys are not just bystanders. They are players in a game whose stakes are far higher than anyone first realizes. Politicians, royalty, house staff, they all carry their own burdens, and it quickly becomes apparent that every one of them might be hiding something crucial. Christie's genius lies in her ability to turn each of these seemingly innocent characters into potential suspects, each one more complicated than the last. As the story progresses, the reader is never quite sure who can be trusted and who is merely playing a role in the grand conspiracy. Through it all, Christie masterfully blends elements of political intrigue with the classic murder mystery formula. But what truly sets The Secret of Chimneys apart is the way she mixes suspense with humor. The high-stakes drama of murder and conspiracy is punctuated by moments of witty dialogue and humorous observations, which breathe life into the characters and provide much-needed moments of levity in an otherwise tense environment. And then, there is the question that hangs over the entire narrative. What secrets are hidden within Chimneys itself? The estate is no mere backdrop. It is a character in its own right. Its sprawling grounds, its winding corridors, and its hidden passages all seem to hold the keys to the mystery. As the plot twists and turns, and as the investigation delves deeper into the heart of the estate, the house's own history, long forgotten by its present occupants, begins to resurface. Secrets from decades ago, buried beneath layers of time and history, are revealed. And with every revelation, the shadow of Chimneys grows darker. This novel is, at its core, a masterclass in suspense. Christie leads the reader down countless paths, only to pull them back with a sudden twist, forcing them to reconsider everything they thought they knew. The Murder at Chimneys is but the beginning. What lies behind it is a tale of political games, hidden identities, stolen treasures, and betrayals that span generations. The grand estate becomes more than just a setting. It becomes a symbol of everything the story is about: secrets, deception, and the lengths people will go to protect their own interests. In this grand web of political power, familial loyalty, and dangerous intrigue, the reader is left to wonder, is Chimneys just the stage for a single murder? Or is it the key to a far greater mystery that has yet to be uncovered? It is this question, posed in the opening pages, that pulls you in. Agatha Christie invites you into her world, one where nothing is as it seems, and every twist leaves you more captivated than the last. And in The Secret of Chimneys, she brings you a story that is as rich in its depth of intrigue as it is in the laughter and light-heartedness that punctuate the dark undertones. As you step into the world of Chimneys, be prepared for a journey that will keep you guessing until the very end. Because at Chimneys, nothing is ever quite what it seems. And sometimes the truth is buried deeper than you could ever imagine. There are few people in this world who have a knack for stumbling into the extraordinary while seemingly seeking the mundane. And if anyone fits that description, it's Anthony Cade. He was a man who had a way of turning the most unassuming tasks into the beginning of something far grander. To those who knew him, Anthony was a charming adventurer man whose wanderlust had taken him across continents, from the bustling streets of London to the exotic corners of Africa, and everywhere in between. He was the kind of man who could walk into a room and immediately hold the attention of everyone in it, not because he was the loudest or most boisterous, but because there was an air of mystery about him. He exuded the type of quiet confidence that suggested he had lived through things most men only dreamed of, things he was not eager to discuss. But despite his reputation for charm, Anthony was not a man driven by ambition or fortune. He was, for the most part, a man of simple tastes, one who preferred the open road to the comforts of a stable home. It was perhaps this very lack of attachment that made him the ideal candidate for a job that would soon drag him into a world he never asked for. It began with a letter that would set Anthony on a path toward a mystery he could never have anticipated. The letter came from a man named Gregory B. Merton, a publisher with connections to the highest circles of European society. The message was brief, polite, and to the point. Anthony was to deliver a memoir and a set of important documents to Merton in London. The task sounded straightforward enough, so much so that it almost seemed too easy. For a man like Anthony, who had become accustomed to much more dangerous and complicated undertakings, this seemed like the perfect opportunity to relax, stretch his legs, and take in the sights of the city. But as always happens in Agatha Christie's world, appearances can be deceiving. The memoir, it seemed, was more than just the recollections of a man who had lived a colorful life. It was, in fact, a crucial piece of a puzzle that spanned nations, generations, and political intrigues far beyond Anthony's wildest imagination. The documents accompanying it were no ordinary letters. They were the keys to unlocking secrets that, if revealed, could change the course of European history. But Anthony had no way of knowing this when he first accepted the task. What started as a simple job quickly became anything but. As Anthony made his way to the publisher's office, something about the situation began to feel off. There was a sense of tension in the air, an unease that he couldn't quite place. His instincts, honed over years of adventure and risk, were telling him that there was more to this than met the eye. He had hardly set foot in the publisher's office when he was approached by a woman whose presence seemed to stir the very air around her. Her name was Virginia Revel, a woman of striking beauty, with dark hair that cascaded like a waterfall, and eyes that seemed to pierce through you, as though she could see every secret you'd ever kept. Virginia was no stranger to danger, nor was she unfamiliar with the world of secrets. She was, in fact, a woman whose own ties to a European monarchy were shrouded in mystery. And in that brief encounter with Anthony, it became immediately clear that her presence was no coincidence. Virginia's words were measured, but beneath them there was a palpable urgency. She was involved in something tied to the memoir Anthony had brought, something that extended beyond simple politics or royal affairs. The documents he had been asked to deliver were not just papers, they were the keys to a royal conspiracy that had remained hidden for decades. The intrigue only deepened as Anthony met more characters, each one more enigmatic than the last. Among them was a man named Colonel Race, a seasoned officer whose stoic exterior hid a sharp mind capable of discerning the slightest nuances in a person's behavior. There was also the rather peculiar figure of Count de la Rue, whose air of arrogance seemed to mask an uncanny knowledge of political maneuverings. And then there was the elusive and mysterious Sir Eustace Pedlar, a man whose sharp tongue and sharp mind gave him an air of authority and suspicion. As these players emerged, each one carrying their own carefully guarded secrets, Anthony began to realize that the task he had thought was simple was anything but. There were murmurs of a revolution, whispers of a long-lost European monarchy that was on the verge of being restored to power. And somewhere, hidden within these documents, was the truth that could either ensure the restoration of the monarchy or prevent it from ever happening. But it wasn't just the politics of Europe that made the situation dangerous. There was a palpable sense of danger in the air, a danger that came from knowing that someone, or perhaps many people, would stop at nothing to ensure that these secrets remained buried. Every person Anthony met seemed to be connected to this larger, darker game, and yet no one was quite willing to say just how deep they were involved. What had seemed like a simple delivery had quickly become a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. As Anthony delved deeper into the puzzle, the stakes grew higher, the danger more immediate, and the mystery more complicated. And in the midst of all of this, Virginia Revel remained a constant and enigmatic ally, whose own motives were as shrouded in secrecy as the story she was helping Anthony unravel. But the most dangerous game was yet to come. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and Anthony found himself at the center of a conspiracy that stretched far beyond the walls of London. What had begun as a task to deliver a few documents had now turned into something much darker, much more dangerous. Anthony was no longer just a messenger, was an unwilling player in a game of power, politics, and murder. And as the first hints of danger emerged, Anthony could not shake the feeling that something far greater was at play. This was no mere delivery. This was the beginning of something that would change everything. Chimneys was no ordinary estate. It was a sprawling country house, nestled on the edge of the English countryside, its very name invoking images of secrets long buried beneath its ivy-clad walls. The mansion stood at the heart of a vast, mist-filled estate, its looming silhouette cutting an imposing figure against the backdrop of rolling hills. There was something about the house, something ancient and proud, that suggested it had witnessed history in the making. And now, like an unwilling host to fate itself, Chimneys would soon bear witness to a new, darker chapter in its legacy. It was here, in this grand and enigmatic estate, that the story took its most thrilling turn. For Anthony Cade, the journey that began with a simple delivery had already led him into a whirlwind of political intrigue and danger. But nothing had prepared him for what awaited him at Chimneys. The moment he arrived, a sense of foreboding washed over him. The house, with its towering spires and labyrinthine hallways, seemed to pulse with an eerie energias, though it, too, was a player in the mystery that was about to unfold. Chimneys was not just a home, it was a symbol of power, of old bloodlines and royal legacies. Every room, every corridor seemed to whisper of its storied past, and yet, there was a tension in the air that spoke of something much darker, a storm that was about to break. The evening began innocently enough, with guests milling about the grand drawing room, exchanging pleasantries and discussing matters of little consequence. The house was full of intriguing individuals, each one a thread in the tangled web of secrets that had brought them together. Politicians, royalty, and even the house staff all seemed to carry the weight of their own mysteries, and the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. But the tension that had been simmering just below the surface suddenly erupted with shocking force. The murder of Prince Michael of Czechoslovakia was not just a tragedy, it was an earth-shattering event that would send ripples of suspicion through every corner of Chimneys. The prince, who had arrived at the estate with an air of royal dignity, was found dead in one of the estate's many drawing rooms, his life extinguished under mysterious and brutal circumstances. The news of the murder hit like a thunderclap, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The guests, once so full of laughter and conversation, were now wide-eyed and speechless. The house, which had once seemed so imposing and proud, now seemed to close in around them, a prison of its own design. Who could have done such a thing? The question echoed through the halls of Chimneys as everyone in the house suddenly became a suspect. At the forefront of the investigation was Anthony Cade, who, despite being a stranger to most of the people at Chimneys, was now inexplicably caught up in the drama. He was no detective, but he had a keen mind and a sense of curiosity that could not be ignored. He quickly realized that the murder was no random act of violence. It was a calculated, cold-blooded killing, and every guest at Chimneys seemed to have something to hide. The prince had been a man of considerable influence, and his death was no mere accident. His presence at Chimneys had been part of a larger scheme, a plot to restore Czechoslovakia's monarchy to its former glory. And with his death, the conspirators who had long been working behind the scenes had just lost their most powerful ally. As the investigation began to take shape, the list of suspects grew longer, each one more complex than the last. The first to come under suspicion was Sir Eustace Pedlar, a man with a sharp tongue and a sharp mind, who had always seemed just a little too eager to insert himself into every conversation. His political connections were extensive, and his motives, it seemed, were just as tangled. Had he acted alone, or was he a pawn in a much larger game? Then there was Colonel Race, the stoic and enigmatic officer who had been a fixture of Chimney's guest list. His cold exterior masked a mind that was always calculating, always watching. Was he involved in the plot to restore the monarchy? Or was he simply caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? And of course, there was Virginia Revel, the woman, whose ties to the European royal family were as mysterious as the house itself. She had seemed so poised, so composed when Anthony first met her, but now, in the wake of the prince's murder, she seemed increasingly uneasy. What role had she played in the prince's death, if any? Was her relationship with him more than just one of a political alliance? But it wasn't just the guests who came under scrutiny. The house staff, too, were not immune to suspicion. The butler, with his cold and professional demeanor, seemed to know more than he let on. The housekeeper, whose sharp eyes missed nothing, was perhaps hiding more than just the secrets of the household. Even the maids, with their whispered conversations and fleeting glances, were now potential players in a far darker game than any of them had anticipated. With every passing hour, the tension in Chimneys grew thicker, and the walls of the estate seemed to close in tighter. Each guest, each member of the staff, each corner of the grand house, became a potential clue. Every word spoken, every gesture made, was analyzed and reanalyzed, as if the very act of living in Chimneys was now an admission of guilt. But despite the growing suspicion, there was something about the house that made it impossible for anyone to leave. The guests were trapped within its walls, the mystery of the prince's death pressing down on them like an invisible weight. And as the hours stretched into days, it became increasingly clear that the murderer was someone among them, hidden in plain sight. The truth, it seemed, was buried beneath layers of lies and half-truths, and as Anthony Cade dug deeper into the mystery, he realized that nothing at Chimneys was as it seemed. There were secrets in every corner, and every face had its own hidden story. Chimneys had become a house of shadows, a place where every whispered conversation, every passing glance, and every hidden doorway might hold the key to unlocking the truth. And as the investigation into the prince's murder continued, Anthony Cade found himself caught in the most dangerous game of all, a game where the stakes were nothing less than life and death. The question, as always, was simple. Who killed Prince Michael of Herzegovina? But the answer, as Anthony would soon discover, was anything but. In the darkened corners of chimneys, secrets were as abundant as the shadows that clung to the towering stone walls. The grand estate, once a symbol of wealth and power, had now become the stage for a deadly game of politics, deception, and ambition. Every guest, every staff member, every room within the mansion held a story that was waiting to be told. And just as the storm outside grew fiercer, so too did the tempest of hidden truths that had been waiting for the right moment to break free. At the heart of the mystery was the plot to restore the monarchy of Herzegovina. It was a political intrigue that stretched its fingers deep into the European power structure, threatening to shake the very foundations of the status quo. Prince Michael's death had been no accident. His death was part of a much larger, more dangerous gamma game, where the stakes were nothing less than the fate of an entire nation. The prince, it seemed, had been one of the key players in a covert effort to re-establish the monarchy in Herzegovina. Behind the walls of chimneys, discussions had taken place, alliances had been forged, and dangerous promises had been made. The prince's memoir, the very one Anthony had been tasked with delivering, contained the key to unlocking the future of a nation. But it was also a dangerous weapon, one that could topple governments, ruin lives, and shift the balance of power across Europe. It wasn't just the murder that hung over chimneys like a storm cloud. It was the realization that, at the heart of it all, there were people willing to kill, to deceive, and to betray in order to ensure the success of their political ambitions. And as Anthony Cade pieced together the clues, he began to understand just how far these conspirators were willing to go. But it was in the midst of this perilous web of politics and power that something unexpected happened, something that could have altered the course of Anthony's own fate. It was in the eyes of Virginia Revel that he found something he hadn't been expecting. Not just an ally, but a woman whose strength and intelligence mirrored his own. Virginia, with her sharp mind and her uncanny ability to navigate the complexities of royal politics, had always been an enigma. She was a woman who carried the weight of her family's legacy on her shoulders, yet she wore that weight with a grace that betrayed no hint of the burden beneath. She was strong-willed, clever, and impossibly composed in the face of danger. But as Anthony got to know her, he realized that beneath that cool exterior was a woman who was just as vulnerable as the rest of them, a woman who had her own secrets, her own fears, and her own past to contend with. It was in the quiet moments between confrontations, the subtle exchanges of glances when no one was watching, that a connection began to form. It wasn't love not yet. Any would. There was something undeniable between them. They were two people caught in the same whirlwind of mystery and murder, and somehow, in the midst of it all, they found solace in one another's presence. But as the mystery of the prince's death deepened, so too did the tension between Anthony and Virginia. She had her own motivations, her own reasons for being involved in the plot to restore the monarchy, and, though she had proven to be an invaluable ally, there were moments when Anthony couldn't help but wonder just how much of her involvement was driven by personal interest, and how much of it was about loyalty to a cause far greater than either of them. As their bond grew stronger, so too did the realization that not everything was as it seemed. Virginia's ties to the European monarchy were deeper and more dangerous than Anthony had ever anticipated. The more he learned about her past, the more questions arose about her true role in the conspiracy. Was she a pawn in a game she couldn't control, or was she a player in her own right, using Anthony just as much as he was using her? But it wasn't just political intrigue and blossoming romance that added to the tension. As Anthony dug deeper into the mystery of the prince's death, he uncovered secrets that were far darker and far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Chimneys, it seemed, was a house of secrets that had been buried for decades, waiting to be unearthed. Hidden passages were discovered behind the grand tapestries, leading to long-forgotten rooms filled with dust and the remnants of a bygone era. These rooms, it seemed, held the answers to some of the greatest mysteries of the estate. One such room, hidden behind a false wall in the library, contained a chest of stolen jewels that had been taken from the royal family of Herzog-Slovakia during a time of turmoil. These jewels, Anthony realized, were not just valuable, they were a symbol of the power struggle that had torn the monarchy apart in the first place. But the discovery of the jewels was only the beginning. The real shock came when Anthony uncovered a decades-old conspiracy, one that stretched back to a time when Chimneys had been the site of another royal scandalone that had been buried by time and forgotten by most. It was a conspiracy that had started with a betrayal, a love affair gone wrong, and a murder that had never been solved. The connections to the prince's death were startling, and it became clear that the threads of the past and present were more tightly woven than anyone could have imagined. Anthony's own role in the mystery grew ever more uncertain. Was he merely a pawn in a game of political maneuvering, or was he becoming something far more dangerous, a man who knew too much and was willing to risk everything to expose the truth? With each new discovery, the walls of Chimneys seemed to close in around him. The murder of Prince Michaei was no longer just an isolated crime, it was the opening move in a much larger game, one that involved the highest echelons of power, betrayal, and a legacy that stretched across generations. And as Anthony and Virginia navigated the tangled web of politics, love, and deceit, they realized that the stakes were higher than they could have ever imagined. Chimneys was no longer just a house of secrets, it was a house of revelations, where every hidden passage, every stolen jewel, and every whispered conversation brought them closer to the truth. But in a world where no one was as they seemed, and where even the most trusted allies could turn into enemies in the blink of an eye, Anthony had to ask himself one question: could he trust Virginia? Or had she become just another player in the dangerous game being played behind the walls of Chimneys? The twists were relentless, the stakes were higher than ever, and with every step forward, the shadows of the past grew darker. The evening had descended into a suffocating stillness, broken only by the crackling of the fireplace and the muffled sound of distant thunder. The atmosphere at Chimneys was thick with anticipation, as if the house itself had drawn a breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion of truth. Every face in the room was tight with tension, every eye wary, as if everyone knew that the time had come not just for justice, but for the unraveling of a dark, twisted tale that had been years in the making. Anthony Cade stood at the center of the room, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind racing to piece together the fragments of a mystery that had consumed him since his arrival. In front of him were the suspects, the men and women who had once seemed like harmless strangers, now revealed as players in a deadly game of ambition and betrayal. The air was thick with suspicion, and every whisper seemed like an accusation. Virginia Revel stood beside him, her face a mask of composure, though Anthony could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She had been his ally, his confidant, but even now he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she was still hiding, something that could change everything. Was she, too, a part of this tangled web of murder and deceit? He had no answers, only questions that seemed to grow with each passing second. One by one, the remaining guests at Chimneys were gathered together in the grand drawing room. The house had become a prison, its walls now closing in on everyone inside. The sense of isolation was palpable. They were all trapped here, unable to leave until the mystery was solved. And now, with the last pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place, Anthony could feel the tension in the air reach its breaking point. Then, it happened. With a sharp, commanding voice, Anthony addressed the room, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the people who had once seemed so innocuous, yet were now revealed to be players in a deadly game. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him, "the time has come to reveal the truth." A hushed silence fell over the room. Eyes darted nervously from one face to the next. The killer was here, among them. Anthony could feel it in his bones. "The murder of Prince Michael," Anthony continued, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "was no random act. It was a calculated, cold-blooded assassination, orchestrated by one of you in this very room." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And the motive, power, greed, the restoration of a fallen monarchy, and the secrets that the prince was about to reveal in his memoir." A murmur rippled through the guests. Some of them shifted uncomfortably, while others exchanged nervous glances. Virginia's hand clenched slightly at her side, but she didn't speak. Anthony's eyes locked onto Sir Eustace Pedlar, the self-assured politician who had played the part of the charming, slightly pompous guest with ease. "You, Sir Eustace," Anthony said, his voice firm but laced with an undercurrent of accusation. "You had the most to gain from Prince Michael's death. You had ties to the conspirators who sought to restore the Herzo-Slovakian monarchy. You knew that the prince's memoir contained the proof of your involvement in a plot that would have changed the course of history." Eustace's face turned a shade paler, but he remained composed. He adjusted his tie, his lips twitching in an attempt at a smile. "My dear man, this is outrageous. But before he could finish, Anthony raised a hand to silence him. "It's not over yet," he said, eyes narrowing. "Here is more to this story than just a political assassination." He turned to Colonel Race, the stoic and enigmatic officer whose presence had always been a mystery in itself. "Colonel Race," Anthony said, "you were no stranger to the prince. Your ties to the monarchy were deep, and your involvement in the restoration plot was far from innocent. But your interest in the prince was more personal, wasn't it? You were the one who had arranged for the prince to come to Chimneys, knowing full well what was at stake." Race's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. His eyes, however, were filled with a cold calculation, as if he were weighing his next move. And then there was Virginia, her face now unreadable, but her eyes betraying a flicker of something, fear perhaps, or guilt. Anthony's heart pounded. He had trusted her, believed in her, but could she have been involved after all? He turned to her, his voice trembling slightly, though he refused to show it. "Virginia," he said softly, his eyes locking onto hers, "I never imagined that you—" His voice trailed off, the words caught in his throat. Virginia's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected him to address her directly. She took a step back, but Anthony could see the tremor in her hand as she reached for her collar. "Anthony," she whispered, her voice laced with vulnerability, "I never meant for it to go this far." And in that moment, the room seemed to collapse into a silence so thick it was almost suffocating. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the truth to unfold, the final twist to reveal itself. Anthony's eyes never left Virginia's. The truth he had uncovered, the pieces of the puzzle he had slowly pieced together, all pointed to one conclusion: the answer was more unexpected more shocking than anyone could have predicted. Anthony took a step forward, his voice low but filled with undeniable certainty. "The truth is," he said, "it was not one of you who murdered Prince Michaei." The room erupted in confusion, the suspects exchanging bewildered glances. Anthony smiled, a thin, wry smile. "It was not one of you," he repeated, "because the true murderer wasn't even supposed to be here." A gasp escaped from the gathered crowd. The realization hit them all at once. Chimneys had been a carefully laid trap. The prince's death was only the beginning of a much larger conspiracy, one that had orchestrated the death of a man who had been far too dangerous to live. Anthony Cade turned to reveal the final truth. In a hidden room, buried beneath the foundations of the mansion, there had been one final piece to the puzzle: the memoir itself, and a hidden letter from the prince, outlining the full scale of the conspiracy. And in the letter, there was a name. The name of the murderer. It was Virginia Revel, a woman whose loyalty had been nothing but a carefully crafted illusion. Virginia had been playing both sides, orchestrating the death of Prince Michaei to ensure that the conspiracy remained buried. Her connection to the royal family had been the perfect cover-up facade that allowed her to manipulate everyone in the room. But why? Why kill the prince? Because Virginia was no innocent bystander. She had been the one with the most to lose. The restoration of Czechoslovakia's monarchy, the jewels, the secrets Virginia, had been at the heart of the political game all along. She had manipulated everyone, including Anthony, to ensure that the truth remained hidden, that she stayed untouchable. But in the end, she had underestimated Anthony Cade. As the truth finally came to light, the tension in Chimneys shattered like glass. The murderer was unmasked, and with it, the web of lies, power, and betrayal that had ensnared them all. And as Virginia was led away, the final twist struck. The stolen memoir, the jewel-laden conspiracies, and the deadly game of power were no longer secrets. They had been exposed for all to see. But in the cold, silent aftermath, one question lingered in the air. Who else had been part of the conspiracy, and what price would they pay for their involvement? The dust had finally settled over Chimneys, but its stillness was far from peaceful. The echoes of the past, the sharp crackle of truth finally unraveling, lingered in the air like smoke from a long-burned fire. Justice had been served, yes, but the finality of the moment felt like a fragile illusion. The secrets of Chimneys had been exposed, but as anyone who had set foot within its ancient walls could tell you, some mysteries were never truly solved. The grand estate, once a home to laughter and lavish gatherings, now stood silent, its towering stone walls concealing truths that only those who had ventured into its deepest shadows would ever know. The murder of Prince Michaei had been but a chapter in a story much larger, a tale of politics, betrayal, and unyielding ambition that had yet to be fully written. Even with the killer unmasked, there was a sense that Chimneys had more to offer, more to reveal, and the sinister allure of its secrets would not be easily forgotten. Anthony Cade stood in the grand hall, his thoughts swirling like the dark clouds that had once surrounded the estate. He had come to Chimneys as an outsider, a simple adventurer with a task, but now he was forever entwined in its legacy. He had solved the mystery, uncovered the killer, and exposed a web of deceit that had stretched across Europe. But there was something else, something that gnawed at him. Behind the completed puzzle, there were still pieces that didn't quite fit. Hidden messages, small clues, and a deeper layer of manipulation had eluded him. Chimneys had been more than just a place for secrets, it had been a stage for something far more sinister, and Anthony couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. There were whisper-silent, subtle hints that the true mastermind behind the entire conspiracy had never been fully exposed. Anthony felt as though Chimneys was still holding its breath, waiting for him to uncover what had been buried beneath the polished floors and tapestries. Virginia Revel, too, had left her mark on the estate in him. She was the woman who had once been a mystery, and though the veil had lifted to reveal the truth behind her involvement in the prince's murder, Anthony couldn't deny the complex emotions she stirred within him. Her strength, her intelligence, and her vulnerability had all led him to see her as more than just a suspect. There was a connection between them, forged in the heat of danger and betrayal, that couldn't be easily dismissed. Yet, even as they stood together, surrounded by the lingering shadows of the house, there was a certain tension between them, a quiet, unspoken understanding that their story was far from finished. Virginia, now cleared of her role in the murder, seemed a little lighter, a little freer, but Anthony could see the weight in her eyes. She was still not entirely at peace with herself or with the choices she had made. Her past, her family's ties to the conspiracy, had created a gulf between them, a gap that words couldn't bridge. And so, as they stood there, Anthony found himself asking one question, over and over. What now? Could he ever truly trust Virginia? Could she ever trust herself? There was a promise in her eyes when she turned to him, her voice soft yet determined. "Anthony," she said, almost as though she were testing the words before she spoke them aloud. "There is still so much left to be done. We can't leave it like this." And perhaps, just perhaps, that was the beginning of something neither of them could yet fully understand. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the echoes of Chimneys would linger, haunting them both in ways they weren't yet ready to confront. As they walked away from the hall, side by side, the door to Chimneys creaked, almost as if it were about to open again, beckoning them back into its secrets. The estate had been quiet for so long, but as Anthony glanced back, he couldn't shake the feeling that Chimneys wasn't quite finished with them. Justice had been served, but questions remained. The killer was behind bars, but the truth, the real truth, had only just begun to surface. What had driven Virginia to become involved in the conspiracy? Who had been the true puppet master, the one pulling the strings all along? Could Chimneys, with all its hidden rooms and dark corners, hold even greater secrets yet to be discovered? Anthony didn't know, but he had a feeling that Chimneys wasn't done with them yet. As they disappeared into the night, the house stood silent and still, its secrets still wrapped tightly within its stone walls. Would Anthony and Virginia return to uncover them? Or would they walk away, leaving the mystery unsolved, like so many before them had? Chimneys would never stop calling. As we reach the end of this gripping journey through the twisting halls of Chimneys, one thing becomes abundantly clear. Agatha Christie's mastery of storytelling is unparalleled. In The Secret of Chimneys, she seamlessly weaves together a tapestry of mystery, political intrigue, and sharp humor, creating a tale that is both thrilling and surprisingly entertaining. Christie's ability to blend these elements, unveiling the darkest secrets of European royalty, alongside moments of light-hearted wit, makes this novel a masterpiece of suspense. She doesn't just deliver a mystery. She invites readers into a world where every character is a puzzle, every twist is unexpected, and every page leaves you wanting more. This novel is a reminder of why Christie is hailed as the Queen of Mystery. Her brilliance lies not just in the complexity of her plots, but in her ability to engage her audience from start to finish, making us laugh one moment and gasp in disbelief the next. If you've already read The Secret of Chimneys, this is the perfect time to revisit it. If you haven't, then you are in for a thrilling ride-on that will have you second-guessing every character, every plot line, until the very end. Interactive segment. Before we wrap up, let me ask you, who do you think was the murderer? Did you guess correctly, or did Christie's trademark misdirection keep you guessing until the very last page? Share your thoughts in the comments below. It's always fun to see how each reader's instincts lead them down different paths. Fun fact: did you know that Agatha Christie's travels around the world significantly influenced her writing? In The Secret of Chimneys, she expertly blends her knowledge of British aristocracy with her global experiences to craft a rich, complex world that feels both familiar and foreign. Christie's keen observations of culture, politics, and society infuse every aspect of the story, adding layers of depth and authenticity that only a writer of her caliber could achieve. Call to action. If you enjoyed The Secret of Chimneys and its riveting twists, I encourage you to dive into more of Christie's timeless classics. From Murder on the Orient Express to And Then There Were None, her works remain unparalleled in the world of mystery. Explore more of her unforgettable characters, breathtaking suspense, and ingenious plots. Trust me, once you experience Christie's genius, you'll be hooked and you'll never look at a seemingly quiet country estate the same way again.